So in this chapter we've started by overhauling the distributor. We've put the motor together. My daughter's teased me in quite a few parts of it, and then we've gone on to try and start it. So enjoy. Run into a bit of a problem with this distributor. I've taken it off cleaning, and I think I've cleaned out too much of the lubricant under here, and now it seems to be solid. So we'll pull it apart, find out what the problem is. Quite often there's dried oil deposits all up the shaft here, so it'll need to be sort of disassembled and cleaned out to rectify the problem. Alright, so I've pulled the distributor apart. You can see here there's a little bit of baked on gunk and that sort of stuff, but otherwise the housing and everything looks pretty good. So I'll just use a bit of Scotch-Brite and sort of take these marks out. The idea is that this shaft has to spin very freely inside the housing without binding on anything. While you've got it out, it's a good idea. I'll just clean those cams off a bit. We have to make sure the advancement mechanism is still working and rotating properly. So you can see it looks in pretty good nick. The key to it though is to make sure that these weights can throw out against the spring, and you can see I'm holding the shaft still, but you're getting some advancement up here. When I move those, they're running really well. Right. The next thing to make sure, of course, is that this advance plate here is moving. This is controlled by a vacuum motor, and as vacuum demands in the engines change, this moves to and fro to counter for advancing and retarding the timing, and that all looks in pretty good condition too. So we'll clean this up a little bit further, give it some lube, just a very light smear, and also make sure this plastic bush here is lubricated on the bottom. Now you can get new distributors for these quite cheaply online, about $100 or so, and a lot of them have this electronic componentry here built into them, but they're a generic type distributor. I'm not sure about the dimensions of the shaft and the dog on the bottom of it to drive it, but they're not set up specifically for the 2480. They're so you don't know if the curve is all good or is designed for that motor anyway, where you know this one, the advance is all set up for that engine. So it's not quite turning as freely as I'd like. I'll just pop that out again. Just use a spot of oil. That should make it a bit easier. Just make sure that bush there is lubricated, and there we go. That's much freer. So we'll check this. Here's the thrust washer that goes at the bottom. I'll just give that a bit of a wipe over, just make sure there's no scaly rot on the bottom of it. Again, a bit of oil around there. I'll plop it on the bottom. And what we'll have to do is we'll just put this drive dog on the bottom. I'll punch the pin through it, and then we'll need to check the end float to make sure that it's not got too much free play this way. So I've driven this roll pin through here. It's now rotating beautifully smooth, and the end clearance, the float, is about 8 thousandths clearance. And 8 thousandths seems good. It allows for the thing to warm up as metal expands and maintain a nice free running result without it having too much sort of end play. So that's a result. That looks wonderful. That looks really strong and positive. The next thing I want to turn my attention to is this breaker plate, which holds the points and condenser. And what I want to do is take all this stuff off, because I intend to run an electronic ignition. There's a little transistor diagram. So we'll take the points and condenser off. And it's always a good idea with these things to keep them in a plastic bag, a sandwich bag, in the glove box, so if anything goes wrong and you're stranded on the side of the road, you can always plop these back in and you're back on your way. So I'll go and clean this up and see how we go. So we're changing these points and condensers for an electronic unit, which is this. This is basically a permanent magnet, or a series of permanent magnets running past a coil in here. It works on the principle that once a magnet runs past the coil, the magnetic field breaks down in the coil and induces a voltage in that coil. If you look at a very simple type arrangement for that, would be that it controls the base of this transistor. It turns the base of the transistor on and off as it rotates past this coil, therefore allowing voltage to come in through the permanent positive from the coil and break off proportional chunks to what's coming in, going out. And then it goes through some inverter circuitry and therefore triggers the black on, off, which fires your coil. In reality, it uses a thyristor arrangement instead of a transistor, and it also uses other circuitry to shape up the signal and make it nice and clean and all the rest of it. But that's basically how it works. It's a very reliable type thing. Now, the next thing with these is transistors that switch on and off, thyristors if you like, that switch on and off, that deal with a lot of voltage, also generate a lot of heat. And if you look at amplifiers and all this sort of stuff, they often have large aluminium heat sinks attached to them. So to counter that, this unit uses the distributor as a heatsink to get rid of its heat, but it needs to have a good thermal contact with the base plate in order to get rid of that heat, otherwise it'll cook. And that's where you use this silicon grease, this thermal grease, which creates a good connection, a thermal connection between the base of this plate here and the body of the distributor, and that's how it gets rid of its heat. So basically what we want to do is we want to lubricate it nicely at the bottom with this stuff here. And we ooze a bit on, give it a nice generous coating and spread it around. And that will make sure it contacts properly in all the right places and it doesn't run a risk of overheating. It's pretty messy stuff, this. So this basically screws on where the point's left off, just in this position here, and we can make small adjustments later onto it to make sure that it's all clearing properly, it's clearancing properly against the rotor shaft and so forth. So we'll just put that on there. This screw here, you can see it oozing out, so we know it's contacting quite well. So that's that one done. So we basically sticking this back in the housing. What's particularly good about these two is even this grommet here, which can slide up and down the wiring, fits this receptacle really, really easily. So here it is installed. You can see it fits in very, very neatly, all under the distributor cap. The wires just tuck around here. It's got a lovely grommet on the side, which is better than the one that came off. I think that was even missing. And that's the only giveaway that it's a non-standard ignition, for the fact that you've got a quick release terminal block that allows you to take it out. Magnet slips over the distributor shaft and the rotor goes on top and just spins around. Now the instructions don't stipulate what the clearance is supposed to be in here. That looks like it's a good 60-80 thousandths, probably 80 thou there, which is a little bit more than I would have liked, but we'll try it and see how we go. All fits under, and of course your rotor button just slides on top. And that is a result. You want to see a bit of nipple? An oil filter nipple! It holds a different, not that close, it holds a different type of oil filter one, but you've got to get the old one off first. Old nipple?
Dad.
Unit, they called it an oil filter nipple. And it's because the man that had these originally, his wife was a robot.
It's fascinating.
Oh, I'm making it up. I think this goes on like that. Oh, look at that nice new nipple. So you've got to make that nice and slippery. And there we go.
I love that whole double chin you've got going on there.
If you reckon I'm bad, you should see the rest of the blokes at the club.
I'm going to send this to them now.
I'll see it anyway, stick it on YouTube.
They'll kick you out. It's so windy.
You know what that means?
You're gay?
No, yeah, I'm gay, but it also means... You're still filming.
Yes.
It also means that it's going to help down the ground. So I've just got a bit of Toyota Corolla hose here, so I'm just going to cut it the right diameter, but it's not quite the right length, so I'll just make a mark there. It's always better to cut it a little bit longer, and then you can sort of always cut it short if you need to, and we'll just use the hose cutters for that. Out there, I'd reckon. Gives you a nice clean cut. Just double check that that's all good. Yeah, it's not too bad at all. Jubilee clips are a little bit too big, but for the purpose of testing an engine, I don't reckon that matters at all. I'll just take that grommet out from where I've painted it. Good thing this, good design in that it just screws in. Very lightly nip it up, but at least now we can fill it with oil and we know how much is there. I'll paint these dipsticks later, but that is a result as well. Give it a bit of a drink. The distance once I put that on. Very important with electronic ignitions that you check the resistance in your coil, check the resistance in the primary winding. The instructions are very, very definite in stating that if it's under 1.5 ohms, don't use it. This one is fairly typical, 4 ohms, 3.9 ohms, that's fairly standard.
Daddy, it's on.
I've got to rewire some of this, we'll do that in a minute.
Are you talking to me?
Yeah. Say bye.
Bye.
Oh, look at that! Just let me nip it up.
It's just fascinating, y'all.
Fascinating. Makes me feel so manly.
Not when you say it in that voice.
So manly. Now, shit, I'm going to take the paint off the fan. Hang on a minute. I'll just grab this and pull it out.
Neck fat.
Are you done?
Sorry.
Neck fat.
Are you
No,
done?
no, that's nice and loose. That's not too tight, so that's cool. Speaking of neck fat, where's Charlie?
Well, he's a carbon copy of you, so.
That's pretty much it in a nutshell.
It's a beautiful day, and you're here
In the weather.
in the dirty, disgusting garage.
This is a nice garage, and look at all fresh air coming in. Look at the view. There's a galaxy to look at.
Oh, yeah, that view, it's just
Right.
breathtaking.
Sorted. So, put the manifolds on next. It's full of oil. A couple of junky looking bits there, but I'll clean them up before it goes back in the car. Plugs are all in, they're a bit loose. We've got to compression test it again. New belt. I'm not going to bother wiring up the generator because I don't care about charge rate at this stage. I just want to use it as an idler so the fan can spin. Starter motor's on. This wiring is ready to solder up and put the right connectors on so I can wire all that in. So I'll continue in a minute. Turn it on. Where's the other use?
What weird noises can you make?
I don't know. I'm not really.
Oh, I know how to do it. I'll do it.
Lana, just be careful with that.
Put it back alone,
Right.
please. And it's making all this creaking noise when you're filming it.
Don't.
It's this.
Well, leave it.
Don't touch it.
Just leave it because it's making all those horrible noises. I need it left. And if you
Tripod's for you, leave it.
hang on a second, just let me do this. Right.
That was the best video. You and Mum were just yelling at me.
Did you film it?
Yeah.
An idiot. Why'd you film it for? Lord of the Rings.
I love Lord of the Rings.
Sucks.
No, I don't.
It sucks.
Oh, can we go?
It's like this fat little cherub holding a wedding band. What, did his wife walk out at the altar or something? I don't get it.
No. Well, the third one. You have to see the third one because it's like 3 hours longer, and the movies are pretty long. So
Really?
imagine that. But
How are you supposed to stay awake?
I don't. Just would you try watching it again? Maybe your opinion has changed
If I
a
wanted
bit.
to suicide, I'd probably watch it first to really get me in the mood.
The camera is rolling.
Fuck. Oh, it's gonna be right.
Snow White and the Huntsman, it's, you know, the story of sort of Snow White, except it's a bit of a darker tale, and it's just a bit, it's more like the Brothers Grimm tale.
What's that?
Not the,
Is that
well,
like
they're
the Unhappy Brothers. So, we've done the manifold. We'll talk from the middle out. Whenever you talk something, you start in the centre and you work your way out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like that. Same as the cylinder head. You start in the middle and you work your way around. So I'll button this up. This is cast iron paint. It looks fantastic, and the good thing about it too is that when it does get a bit of age on it, it sort of goes to champagne colour, but it doesn't have that nasty sort of rusty brown that the original one had. New gasket. You can spend $45, $50 at some places. I got this for $22 from a Kill-Size supplier, Jim. I'm a little bit nervous. We're ready to start this thing now. I've got to take the plugs out and crank the motor over. That'll do two things. Firstly, we should see some oil pressure coming up. And secondly, I want to see if it's pumping fuel over the tank on the other side. Try and get a bit of... make sure the coil's off. We've got the engine going. Those are lit up. You can't see it from there, but we'll... I'm waiting for oil pressure. Okay, we've got the fuel up there now. That's good. Okay, here's the motor ready to start. I just had it running a minute ago. Needed to crank it over with the plugs out to get oil pressure up, and also to check that fuel was coming up. Unfortunately, I've only got a 1560 muffler, which doesn't fit, and we're leaking out of here. It sounds absolutely dreadful. Have to always make sure when you start these things that it's in park, and that's locked. Hello, Rosie. Say hi.
Hi. Hi.
So here we are, got coil tacho, oil pressure switch down here, the lead for that, coil positive, temp sender. Generator's just acting as an idler at the moment. There's nothing going out of there into the battery. The battery's all sat down here with a Ford type solenoid on it. To crank it over, we turn the master power on, and we can crank it. To start it, we need to turn core power on, and off she goes. Terrible leak coming out of here. This cast iron paint always smokes when you start it for the first time because it bakes itself on. Just want to check the vacuum leaks with some water. Using a thinners bottle. That all looks alright. Squirt a bit of water around the base of the carburettor, an inlet manifold, just with a little bit of water there. And that all looks, bit of a hiccup there actually, go back there. Bit of a mist there, I'm not sure whether that is or not. That all looks alright. Another one's to make sure the cylinders are doing the right amount of work. I use these chicken pliers, I call them chicken pliers. Loosen the leads off, and you take each lead off one at a time. Let's go back to number 2. So that checks all your cylinders are firing and they're all working. So you can see it runs quite well. We've got 150 degrees, a bit over 150 degrees on the coolant. Oil pressure is sitting a bit above 50, around 50. I think that's right there. That's probably sitting on about 6 degrees though. I think factory is 3. I might use a mirror, see if I can see it a bit better. I think now what we'll do is a warm or a hot engine compression test and see if that number 2 compression's come up at all. Haven't had it running terribly long, but the plugs are all very consistent in the same colour, which is always a good thing. So I'll screw these in. Remember, I don't think that exhaust leak is going to be helping this. One thing with these B series that's a bit of an Achilles heel is the breathing on them. Now, if you look at an old Holden 6, they have a walking stick coming all the way down and a far bigger tube. They also run a vented cap. Now, after that they would run a PCV valve, which used engine vacuum to draw out any blow-by gases, I should say, and they'd be combusted in the engine and sent out the exhaust. They also had a vented cap. Now, after that, of course, they had sealed caps, but they had another intake from the rock cover. So there was always two places that they could breathe from. Now, these things only breathe from the one, from this small tube here going into the lid of the air cleaner. Now, what happens is these do block, and then you get all sorts of trouble with oil pouring out the rear main and all this sort of stuff. I've seen that on these before. Always use fuel-rated or oil-rated hose here. This is just heater hose, just for the test. This is no long-term solution because it will break from inside and block as well. All up, I'm pretty pleased with that. I'm not going to pull it apart, I'm going to leave it. I'm going to put it back in. The compression on number 2's come up a little bit. It's not as high as I'd like it, but after being driven with a few oil changes, I reckon it might be okay. I certainly don't think it's got a broken piston or anything. This time we'll start doing work on the car itself and cleaning up this awful mess. So in the next couple of, well, probably about 4 or 6 weeks, I'll post another video and show the progress of that. And once, of course, that's done, I can plonk the engine back in. I'll have a good look at the front end and make sure there's nothing nasty going on there as well. Okay then, see you later.